I'm Ilyce Glink. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Best Money Moves, and my news is that I sold my company like 6 weeks ago. So, thank you. Huh. See, Ralph's like, are you gonna say something? I'm like, yes. That was my big announcement. I still write for Slate, and I still write my syndicated column for Tribune, and I still do stuff for WGN Radio, so nothing has changed. But that has changed, and it's everything. We have a lot of change going on, just to give you a great segue, to the real estate brokerage world, and Ralph's asked me to moderate this panel with 3 people who actually don't need moderation. So instead of doing that, we're just gonna have a conversation, and we'll save some time at the end for everybody to ask questions if you've got it. So I just introduced myself, so I'm gonna turn this over to Curt, and then Marilyn and Sam. They're gonna introduce themselves, and then I've asked them to give you 2 or 3 things that they think should be on your radar if you're covering what's going on in the brokerage world.
All right. Hey, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for allowing me to come, and thanks for moderating this. I'm Curt Beardsley. I am with Zillow, and I have been with them for about 11 years. Prior to that, I was with Realtor.com and top producer for 15 years. And prior to that, back when the earth was still cooling, I had a small software development company up in the Seattle area in the early 90s, and we developed the first MLS system that used internet technology, and actually worked with Windermere, a large brokerage up in the Seattle area, to put some of the first listings on the internet. This was in the early 90s for that. So I have been around real estate for a long time. The 2 things I want to throw into the mix today are, 1, consumer expectations, how they have been changing over the years, and then adding on to that, the second point is how technology is influencing that and changing what the consumers are expecting. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Great. I'm Marilyn Wilson, founder and CEO of the Wave Group and retechnology.com. I have been in real estate I'm only about 25 years. I'm a rookie. Prior to that, I was actually in the consumer packaged goods world, and I was head of marketing and strategic planning for Fisher Price Mattel. So a lot of what kind of colors my thinking about real estate comes from the consumer side as well. And I'm going to talk, I think, today about what I think could be some of our next lawsuits, because those are always so fun to talk about, right? And I think let's talk also about why AI is particularly important and relevant for brokerages, because they're such a low margin business.
Yes, and my name is Sam Scott. I'm the Director of Information with the Houston Association of Realtors. I've been there for over 20 years now, and got into that by working with Public Records at the Public Records subsidiary of Stewart Title. And I got into working with Public Records because I worked for a large law firm that was restructuring financial institutions that had cratered back in the 1980s, savings and loans and things such as that. So I sort of cut my teeth building databases of real estate back when it was done on floppy disks. So it's been an interesting ride, but again, really have been very focused on trying to get the MLS put on a modern platform, and it's something I didn't realize was going to take quite this long.
And a couple of things you think we should talk about.
A couple of things. The whole way that buyers are represented, I think it's going to be less of a casual afterthought, and that the new regulatory environment is going to really require a more rigorous approach to buyers' representation. That AI, obviously it's impacting the way some people search for real estate, but I think it's also going to really impact the way people are defrauded in real estate, and then also rentals. I think the whole rental thing seems to be catching on and becoming much more of a segment of the industry that brokerage is going to need to really stay focused on.
And my 2 things are climate change and whether brokers should be talking to people about that. And then we discussed this, it's not really my idea, but this idea that some brokers or agents will go to their clients and give them a list of things that are options for them, and then just go choose one. And is that actually good agency or not? So we'll see how far we get into all of these things. But if we don't cover the topic that you really have to know about for your next column, please go see these lovely people afterwards. All right, let's dig in and start with whether consumers should be in the center of everything, as some agents and brokers think they maybe should. And we'll sort of frame that in Marilyn's least favorite topic, pocket listings, which I promise we're only gonna spend 5 minutes on. But let's talk a little bit about the information that consumers are getting these days. I think that's, and who should be able to get that information first. And maybe, Curt, you want to start us off?
So at Zillow, we believe that consumers should have access to all the information out there, all the information on all the listings that are for sale. And so we do not believe that most of the push for pocket listings is in the consumer's benefit. We actually don't believe it's in the seller's benefit either. We have done deep surveys of that. Other MLSs have done surveys as well that have shown that buyers who sell through private networks leave money on the table. Our survey said across the United States that about $1 billion was left on the table for people who participated in private networks. So we've always been a consumer advocacy group. We've always believed that we should show as much information to consumers as possible. And so we believe that buyers are best served by having access to that full information. And don't believe that sellers who are sometimes making the choice to go into private networks have a full understanding of what they're giving up in that process.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think the point that I was trying to make is that there's a variety of different ways to sell property today. Many of them are confusing because we just throw more buzzwords at them. IDX and VOW and demo, and what's a demo, and is that a Dremel? What is that? What's a demo, right? And maybe I'm being Pollyanna about this, which is very possible, Ilyce. I get accused of that on occasion. But there are different ways to sell properties. In some cases, a private listing is the right way to do that. Is it a predominant group? No, I believe I'm with you. I think it's probably a very small number of people. But there are a variety of different ways depending on your particular situation. Even though you might put it on the MLS, you might not be ready to put it on the MLS, for example. You need 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks to fix something. So my Pollyanna thought is to allow consumers to understand each of them. To your point, educate agents on how to tell that story effectively, and then not steer them one way or the other. Let them make their own decision. They are intelligent. They're the ones that have spent the hundreds or millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands or millions. Let them decide what to do with their asset.
Are they really qualified, Sam, are consumers qualified to make that decision, or do you think agents should be helping them make that decision? Should they educate them in a better, different way than they are today?
Well, specifically, we're talking about sellers. And if you're a home seller, that means that at some point you've also been a home buyer, that you've owned and possessed that property. And so there's some level of sophistication that comes with being a property owner. And when you go to sell, if anything, their expectations about what they're gonna sell it for are oftentimes maybe somewhere above where the actual market is, but they want to get as high a price as possible, and they want to sell it as soon as possible. And I think most people realize that means going for maximum exposure, both on the MLS and MLS public-facing websites, some of the internet-enabled brokers like Zillow or Homes.com, hoping the MLS will syndicate to Realtor.com and all the other various broker sites and things that are out there. And so it seems to me like it's a pretty heavy lift, for a broker or an agent to be able to talk a seller into like, hey, I've got my special secret high intensity internet marketing thing that I'm gonna do for you, so let's hold it out of the MLS. And you can do that with our MLS. I mean, we have it's fully about a page and a half long form that sort of someone has to initial, all the way down there, like, hey, I understand it won't be in the MLS, that it won't be getting maximum exposure, that it won't be on, the association website, so people, the one thing consumers really want is they want somebody they can trust, to help them through the transaction. And so, to your point, Lisa, is that, consumers, sellers put a lot of confidence, a lot of faith in their realtor that they've hired to help them market their property. And if their agent is telling them like, hey, I think I can get you a really full price, very quickly, maybe save you some trouble and hassle by, doing a private listing. Some segment of people are gonna say, okay, let's give that a try, but they're gonna be pretty impatient. And if they get a lowball offer, or it's been 2 weeks and they haven't had a showing, it's gonna be like, hey, let's go ahead and get it put into the MLS. So, I don't know, did I answer the question?
Well, one thing that's sort of interesting, not really, but okay. One of the things that I think is sort of interesting is this idea that all of our buyers and sellers come within a local area, right? I have an agent friend who's the #1 broker in Georgia, the whole state of Georgia, and I would say more than half of her buyers come from outside of Georgia. So you've got a secret private network that you're going to show your listings, so you're going to miss a whole lot of buyers. And I would imagine, Curt, that you actually would agree with that there are a lot of people around the country who are looking at properties all over the world, not just here, and they're buying sight unseen, which I got to tell you, I've been in this business long enough that was just never done. But it is now. People buy them sight unseen. They're like, go take a video for me. Sure, like videos can't be faked. You should see the AI videos I see. So, when you look at stuff like this, Curt, percentage of buyers and sellers outside of the purview is sort of the immediate area of an agent, or an agent who now represents, just take my home city, Chicago, they're doing stuff in the city and all the way up in Lake Forest. What do you think about that?
Well, the territory that agents cover has expanded greatly over the last several years. Just look at the collapsing of the number of associations in an area where there used to be a local association in every jurisdiction. Now, many of those are merging. MLSs are now covering huge territories, much larger than they used to. And so agents are much freer to work a large area. And there are increasing, depends on the time of the year and the year, the number of buyers from out of the area completely for that. But it's not only do they miss territory or miss inventory if it's in a private network, but it also has an influence on who they can work with. And that's a problem as well. So if I have a really good agent, a buyer's agent that I have worked with and I have committed relationship with, and they are helping me out, they can't see that inventory. They can see all the inventory in the MLS and they can provide that to me. And so I believe that the incentive for most of this is actually a recruitment policy by some of those brokers to try to get some of the agents to move over to their brokerage. It's not, so they're using the seller's home effectively as marketing fodder for a recruitment program within their brokerage. And so I don't know that serves the seller's interest well. There are edge cases always, and those have always been in the MLS, and there's always been ways for them. But the vast majority of these listings going into private networks now are actually probably serving a different interest than the interest of that seller.
Marilyn, are brokers different today? Are they evolving as the brokerages are? Because this is like a big corporate game that Curt has just described, right? This isn't really about the agent on the ground who's going to show you 1, 2, 3, Beardstown Avenue, right? So are the agents evolving, and are they aware that they're pawns in this large corporate game?
Wow, that was 3 really different questions you just asked me.
I know, it's my specialty.
Let's start with the pawns thing.
Okay.
I would completely disagree with that. I have seen many, many times in many different situations where brokers are powerless if their agents don't want them to do something. Whether that be to merge 2 organizations, whether that to be to, I can tell you 14 examples of that, where brokers who are the ones responsible for the transactions, are responsible for the success and the legal viability of transactions, are not in charge. It's agents, sometimes even non-productive agents, that are running organizations like associations and MLSs, that are setting policy, that are sitting on boards, and brokers are not really in charge. And even within the NAR organizational structure, their authority has been dialed back. There's less brokers that are being represented these days. So I would disagree that agents are pawns. I would agree though that one of the things that worries me, regardless of this closed, open, all of the stuff we're talking about, that is to me small relative to what I'm seeing, which I really don't like, is the erosion of collaboration. There's people that have visceral responses when you say a particular brokerage brand, and they're all different depending on which brand they're from.
Sure.
Right, so you're seeing large brokers publicly fight, and I'm sure it's translating sometimes into boardrooms and things too, where people won't collaborate with one another anymore. We already lost compensation out of the MLS. Now I think we're losing collaboration in the industry. That is much more dangerous than any one of these policies. So that's the thing I worry about. I think brokers are playing less nice with one another, and we all as consumers are gonna get caught in the crossfire on that. Now, the other thing I would say, back to your first question, I think I got them all.
Maybe not, but okay.
You said, are agents, are they expanding? Do we need more data access, and are we expanding, right? So one of the things that I worry about, because we've seen this happen and I think it's gonna happen more, is the truth is an agent is dictated by their license, and the ability to sell real estate is dictated by their license. Not by where they live, not by what association or MLS they belong to, not what brokerage they belong to, it's their license, right? So if I'm in Illinois, I can sell all across Illinois. Should I? Not necessarily, but can I? Absolutely. So you're seeing lots of lawsuits now with this whole open MLS concept. I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but basically what that is saying is that if I'm an agent, regardless of whether or not I want to, if I want access to be able to sell through the MLS, I have to belong to a real estate association. And there are many people starting to question that. And we now have those licenses in Pennsylvania, Texas, Louisiana, Michigan, and probably a few more that I don't even remember, that are questioning that, because we've been conditioned to think you have to belong to an association in order to work with an MLS. And the truth is the data is what's important to everybody. And it's driven by the fact you have a license, not the fact that you're a realtor. So I'm envisioning we're gonna see more and more of that. And why are people moving around? Because they had to. There wasn't enough inventory. Or they have clients that say, hey, I want you to go to Lake Country with me, or to the mountain country, whatever that means, right? So we're seeing that type of thing too. They're following their clients, and their clients are asking them to do that. But I worry that we're gonna see more of those types of lawsuits, and this sort of artificial connection between the two is gonna break.
All right, so Sam, this sounds like a few things that I'd love for you to weigh in on.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll do that, and in particular, I want to pick up on sort of the last of the questions that you sort of threw out there with Marilyn, and that is just how is the industry changing? And just in the time that I've been working with the realtors in Houston, you know, go back 15 years ago, and it took 20 brokerage firms to get to half of the listings. And all of those firms were locally owned and controlled. And they were people who, you know, their kids attended the same schools, that they'd stand in the same buffet line at the country club on Sunday, you know, for lunch, that they, you know, there was a lot of, you know, interactivity, that they knew each other very well. And now, you know, it only takes about 5 brokers to get to 50% of the listings, and none of them spend a night in Houston. You know, that they are all national firms being run nationally, and that, you know, they have local managers, and obviously that they're agents and things, but they're getting, you know, sort of, you know, when headquarters is calling in plays, you know, they're not really thinking about sort of how do we do things in Houston. And so, you know, I mean, yeah, that does, you know, sort of stress our organization a little bit more. And speaking to Marilyn's point about open MLS, really for over 15 years, you know, HAR has allowed, you know, non-realtors, you know, to participate in the MLS, to participate in our lockbox network. But nonetheless, it's really only been mostly on the commercial side of our organization that you've really seen, you know, probably the predominance of transactions, and particularly different types of leasing activity that's really run by the larger national non-realtor firms. But now we're beginning to see a little bit more of, you know, people wanting to, you know, participate in the MLS and drop the realtor affiliation. And so we are doing some things, particularly on the commercial side of our shop, to really beef up, you know, offer a more robust set of services to our non-realtor members. But to Marilyn's point, I think we're going to be seeing, you know, more of that sort of activity over on the residential side. And certainly at the end of the day, we're competing and cooperating with a lot of other MLSs in the state of Texas. And they, you know, many of these other MLSs are also working on service sets to attract non-realtors to participate in their network. I mean, there is kind of a Metcalfe's law thing that, that your network is more valuable, the more nodes it has on it. And so you really want to attract these non-realtors so that they are affiliated with and participating on your platform. And I think, most, progressive organizations are going to be focused on how can they offer more better service, to people regardless of whether they're realtors or not.
All right, I want to turn our attention a little bit to climate change. So every one of our areas are just being affected in one way, shape, or another. And there's a lot more information. Zillow's put a lot of it on its website. Agents seem perhaps hesitant to talk about that. We were talking about this downstairs in the green room. As climate change intensifies, let's put it that way, what responsibility do agents have to represent things like, oh, that house was damaged, and flooded 3 times in the last 3 years? Like, is there a responsibility, should consumers expect there should be honesty about that sort of stuff, or is it enough for them to say, oh, it looks great, doesn't it?
So I'll start at the top of the consumer funnel. We have about 227, is that the right number? Million consumers that come to Zillow every month. And one of our goals is to make sure that they have access to as much information as we can possibly get in front of them, but also have information that will get them to ask questions, to say, oh, this is something I should care about, this is something I should think about. So climate change is one of the things that we have on our site. We have commuting distances, we have air quality, we have a bunch of information that you can dig in there, including the history of past sales, etc. on that property. And then our responsibility is to connect them, if they want to a great agent in that market, and then go on down the line. But we believe that if we can get as much information in front of them up top, they will do a lot of digging in the site. They will be able to understand which properties are interesting to them, what questions they should ask when they get connected to an agent. Then what are the details, which ones they want to exclude. That saves on touring, it saves on all the other things, so they can narrow down that buy box that they have interest in. Then we connect them to a realtor for that. And then for the rest of the question, I'll pass it on down the line.
Okay. Yes, to answer your question, I think it is part of their responsibility, just like it is to disclose anything about the home, any of the weaknesses or strengths, right? There's probably more laws that could be put in place in states to kind of require more of that kind of disclosure. Cotality just published a study, I think it was a week ago or so, that was talked about the fact that pretty much every state on the entire eastern seaboard, and then even moving in, has been affected by hurricanes and other types of big weather issues. And that's not even talking about California and fires and the whole other side of the country. So I think the data is out there. I think all of us owe it to educate consumers and the industry about why they need to pay more attention to it. It is something, Sam can talk to this specifically, they're in the middle of it right now in Houston. There is reticence to talk about that, but I can tell you I've done a fair amount of focus groups with consumers, asking them specifically about what they'd like to see on websites. The 2 things that always come up are flood maps, and floor plans. Yeah. So those 2 are absolutely top of the list. So yes, consumers want it, and unfortunately it's affecting more and more states. So this is not just a, Louisiana, Texas thing. This is everywhere now. So
well, consumers' expectations are changing. What they should know before they make a purchase. I mean, Amazon has taught us that we should have not only all the details of a product, but competing products are there, and then reviews of people or bots that had something to say about that particular product. So consumers' expectations for the knowledge that they have going ahead of a purchase has just gone up and up every single year.
And I think we mentioned earlier, insurance is another piece of that. I'm going through this right now. I have a home in St. Petersburg, Florida that got hit, did you guys know, twice last year? And they were like, hurricane insurance? You want that? Yeah. So I'm going through that right now. It's very, like there could almost be an insurance index of how insurable or how expensive is it to insure a home. Like consumers are ravenous for information. That's the only way to describe it. And so all of us, whether it be you guys in the media educating them or us in the industry, we owe it to them. And frankly, it's a great way to engage them, because they really wanna know these things.
It's funny, because I would say 30 years ago, when I started writing about real estate, consumers didn't really know much at all. There wasn't very much information, there was no internet. There were these large books of black and white photos that were weeks old that you couldn't take out of the broker's office. The broker was certainly at the middle of things, and Zillow in large part, you guys changed a lot of that, and so did the internet just in general. But Sam, you know, when you look at your agents, what responsibility do you have, right? And now it's in our pockets, right?
Well, I mean, well, there is
Soon it's on our faces, but, so Sam, is there a responsibility to train agents better, to provide this information, to counsel them, to give them classes in it? Or is this something you leave to them to their own devices?
Well, no, obviously there's a rigorous training program. I mean, the number of hours required to get a license, and then certainly being a fiduciary and making sure that there's full disclosure is very much at the cornerstone of that. I guess really what you get down to is that there are really two different mentalities at work when you're talking about flood hazard. And there's the seller, who, it's kind of like, hey, it's no big deal, just buy the flood insurance and you'll be fine. And then they also are being truthful on their seller disclosures to whether or not that property is flooded. And then there's the buyer who's, again, trying to make sure the kids are going to the right school, getting close to their work, their job, and like, gee, look at this, I'm looking at a flood map and the property is located just right outside of the 500-year floodplain, so we must be good. And so you sort of have, two different competing schools of thought, at work around, this listing information. And obviously, agents with listings are the lifeblood of an MLS, and so they have a lot to say about how the MLS functions. And that, we do have like a big consumer facing thing. We promote it on billboards all over the city. Go to har.com/flood and you can look up, any address and, see the scores from, First Street. You can see the FEMA flood maps. You can see other, flood information. But, what Marilyn's alluding to is that, there have been some thought that, hey, wouldn't it be cool to put that flood link on the listing detail page, where consumers would be seeing that, and that they could just push that one button and for that particular property, access all of that sort of information. And, there we have been getting a very specific, loud and clear message, coming in on all our different channels, from agents with a lot of listings that, that being too transparent, too upfront, exposing too much of that information in some fashion almost stigmatizes a property that, might be, kind of close to some of those flooding areas. And so, we really are, again, as an association, trying to balance those things. Again, we are being as forthcoming as is possible and making all of that information readily available. But as far as, really, putting, bold-faced warnings on certain, properties that, hey, this place flooded in 2017, no, we're not there yet.
Okay. I mean, consumers basically want a Carfax for a house, in effect.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for. And if we can get it for cars, why can't we get it for houses? And I
Didn't
think that's
somebody
where you
start
guys
that
have-
company?
Zillow has an advantage because they are willing to do that. Whereas organized real estate has to listen to all these voices and sometimes gets pulled back.
Well, you look at the consumer's expectations. When the internet first came out, they said, oh wow, a site that I can go to find out if something is for sale. But that was really all there was. There were a few photos. I remember when Realtor.com only had 4 photos on it. And the agent had to pay to have more photos put on it. And Zillow kind of blew that model out of the water. But so it was, okay, what's for sale and what's the price? And then it moved on to, hey, now I can actually look at some photos and get a better understanding of whether I like this house. And then this thing came along, and now I can walk around and I have the entire inventory with these beautiful photos in my pocket. And every time the expectations change, there's a new level set for what's a base. And now you have to have 45 photos or 50 photos of a house, interior, exterior, to even really be a decent listing. And then someone says, okay, but I want to know what the house looks like. So we created these automated floor plans, so you can get a view of the house. And that became now table stakes on any decent listing, has to have that. And they say, okay, now when I'm looking at a photo, I wanna know where in the house I am. So now we put a dot on the floor plan and have that shadow, you know, that what the Google Maps has, and knows which direction you're going, so you can know which way the camera was facing for that. And then they say, okay, that's great, now I wanna walk through the house. Okay, so now, you know, we can, and so the consumers are increasing the amount of information they're gathering so that they can make better decisions for what are the final set of properties they can take to their agent. Because we believe that will always be the case. We believe that there will always be an agent in the play for that. But we believe that the technology that we can bring in, the AI that we can bring in, actually makes the decision-making process. And you can't back away from that. The consumers are expecting it, they've learned it on every other site. And so, yeah, we want them to be able to walk through the house seamlessly, see all that image, and potentially walk up to that back door and step outside. But for that, you're gonna have to come to our media event this summer to see all the new stuff we're coming out with.
Ooh, look at that.
So,
All right, well, I wanted to leave some time for questions, but I do want to just, since you just brought up AI, Curt, just a quick sentence, how is AI changing the way brokerage and agents evolve?
So AI is doing two things. It's helping the consumers, we talked about that, a lot of the media stuff is AI driven for that. But it's actually, our focus is also on how can it improve the lives of great agents. Because we believe that agents will always be involved, but how do we actually make the good agents even more effective? And so we're doing a lot of technology and AI into that. For example, simple thing, you're driving along as an agent and you're having a conversation with a client. Instead of trying to scribble notes down on a piece of paper on your center console, AI can actually listen to that conversation. It takes detailed notes for that. It gets the names of the people and the birth dates and the name of the dog or whatever is in that conversation, drops it into your CRM, and then it comes up with a list of tasks that you agreed to do while you were driving along for that. And if it's possible, in our current technology, it will actually do some of those tasks. So, hey, you're supposed to arrange a tour. Okay, let's set that up for that. So there's a tremendous amount of technology that we can apply to the lives of great agents to make them even more productive. But the entire ecosystem that the consumer goes through, from looking at a house on Zillow to actually closing that house, is not seamless. There are some potholes in there. The loan process, the closing process, the documentation process. And so we believe that AI can be very good at understanding the documentation needs, understanding what data needs to be available, making sure that data is available at the right time, in the right place, to the right person, for that to begin to make that a seamless transaction. Because we want them to be as delighted at the end, as they did at the beginning. I think someone said a stat earlier from one of our Zillow surveys that 50% of buyers cry at least sometime during the process. And we're not sure that AI can get that down to zero. This AI can take it to half, and then a fantastic agent can actually take it the rest of the way down. Because we don't want any crying in real estate, just like no crying in baseball, right?
Tears of joy, that's sad. Brokers are going through it, and this is going to be another one of those arms races where Zillow thinks they should be in charge, technology companies think they need to be in charge, and brokers think they need to be in charge of these sort of long-term ecosystems, day in the life of. I think Zillow's probably winning, but that's a different story.
We're just putting the consumer in charge.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. But brokers are looking heavily at AI, frankly, for a very practical reason. One is that their margins are horrible. They're not profitable companies, so taking cost out of the process is helpful for them, and if that means faster to close, which means more cash flow. So some of it is related to transactions, some of it's literally about running the company. The second is building a more meaningful partnership with their agents and finding ways for AI to do that. And again, same thing that Curt was talking about, that AI creates a more meaningful relationship for agents with the ultimate, buyer and seller. So brokers are very serious about this. There's a lot, we're seeing all kinds of great things. We're actually working on many of them behind the scenes ourselves. So more to come. Hopefully we'll have some announcements soon too.
So exciting.
Oh,
Sam.
Well, and listing a piece of property is about 100 very tedious tasks. You know, in addition to getting the pictures taken, the pictures have to be loaded, there have to be captions developed, there have to be public remarks. You know, a lot of stuff needs to get filled in. There's, you know, forms, seller disclosures. And so really that's kind of where we're focusing a lot of our AI initiatives, is in that area of, you know, processing imagery, you know, generating captions, generating remarks, and really trying to take a lot of the, you know, drudgery out of preparing a listing and getting it online so that, you know, when it hits the active status and goes out on the listing alerts and the hot sheets, that you've got a fully formed listing and not just a half-baked hodgepodge of stuff that didn't quite get finished. And then also you look at, you know, again, for 20 years, the industry's been trying to introduce something called transaction management. And for about the last 5 years, people have been trying to roll out CRM systems. And again, these are systems that are supposed to bring, or if used properly, bring about a much higher level of a consistent experience, you know, higher quality, you know, transaction, but they again require a lot of attention and detail. And Curt sort of alluded to the fact that a good AI agent, you know, can now really automate the manner in which a lot of that CRM data is collected and acted upon. Those AI agents can be nudging the agent as to who they should be following up with. And again, the transaction management platforms are going to be much more transparent in terms of their ability to monitor what's going on in the transaction. And again, as far as monitoring transactions, again, that's just kind of where, I mean, you know, wire fraud has already has been a big factor here over the course of the last 5 or 6 years in terms of, you know, realtors having their computer hacked, you know, and that they don't realize that they've been hacked and that there's somebody spying on their emails and their transactions, and they know exactly when a closing is going to be, and they're able to swoop in with, you know, expert timing and steal money. And that I think, you know, AI is going to make that even, you know, a bigger issue, but also, you know, start having title fraud. And you know, we, you know, just in our own MLS, you know, we get subpoenas frequently from, you know, the district attorney and other law enforcement agencies that are looking into fraudulent transactions where, again, people are having property stolen from them, and, you know, stuff getting listed by people who don't actually own it. And you know, we have a large quality assurance team that is always looking and acting on tips or reports that are coming in from our members. And again, I think at some point, you know, we're going to need better AI tools to try to safeguard the integrity of these systems and to really try to cut down on fraud.
Yeah, I agree. It's getting very scary out there. I'm gonna call time there, and just, we've got about 5 minutes. If anybody has any other questions or any questions for our panel, please raise your hand. Yeah? You?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Well, this whole discussion about agents as pawns kind of went over my head. I didn't quite understand the whole context. I was gonna ask a question before that about Mr. Phillips' comments that that brokerages aren't in the real estate business, they're in the agent business. Is that what you were referring to there? Or is that...
What I was referring to with the comment that our agents sort of pawns is this idea that there's a larger corporate game going on when it comes to private listings. So if you have a private listing, you know, our pocket listing as we used to call it, right? You're showing it amongst your own, you're incentivized to show it amongst your own group before it goes into the MLS. So there's a whole bunch of rules now, like in the state of Illinois, they're trying to pass a law, a state law requiring you to put it on the MLS or out there within 24 hours of signing the listing agreement. Curt said that it's really a corporate game about getting more brokers and more agents to join the broker firm, and I'm saying, so are you saying that agents are actually just pawns then, and are they even aware that they're being used for this corporate game? That was what, that went by a little fast, so I apologize, but that's what I was getting at.
So, can you comment on that statement? Was Mr. Phillips correct?
I don't know if they knew what I said.
We didn't know what you said. What did you say?
I commented in
You said
the panel yesterday that when we built our brokerage model, and we operate, for those that know, Marilyn knows me, we operate in 39, 40 states. When we built our model, we built to not have a whole bunch of agents, that we felt the brokerage models were very similar to casinos. Even brokerages say we're the most agent focused brokerage, not the most consumer focused. Zillow talks about consumer, but most brokerages say, we're all about the agent. Brokerages and casinos need a lot of players. They'll take a few sharks who can win big. That'll help bring in more players. There's a lot of turnover, but if my casino / brokerage gets more agents in the current models, most of these brokerages win, and that's what I was referencing to.
Right.
Sounds like you said what I said, but much more eloquently, so thanks for repeating that.
I agree with what you just said. And I've heard more than one broker, and I've tried to argue the point, and they don't wanna hear it, that they think it's about their agent. If they keep their agent happy, their agent will go do the work. That isn't always in complete alignment with what the end user consumer needs or wants.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think brokers have it's just a model that requires them to recruit and retain, and that's where their money comes from.
Before the internet, they needed infantry feet on the ground.
Right.
We don't fight wars that way anymore.
I've never heard it compared to being a casino, however. I think that's an interesting analogy.
Completely unique. All right, last question, if anybody else has one, or shall we end on casino? Oh. I was just gonna say, or should we end on casinos? Go ahead, there's another
Go ahead,
minute.
Jim.
Well, I wanna go back to pocket listings, cause in 2019, I covered the NAR's decision to basically enact the cooperation policy requiring that all listings be on the MLS. And now I see that it's kinda coming full circle again, and I kinda understand, of course, it's in the seller's interest to be as widely publicized as possible, and get as many buyers to know about the property. But, I think that the objection is from some of the large brokerages and from Compass and others who create their own networks, is that, NAR has a monopoly, that if you want to play, you've gotta go to the NAR MLS to get the brokerage, to get the business. So anyway, I just wonder if you could comment on that.
I'd like to just say something, which is that at the end of the day, the brokers think it's their listing. It's still the seller's house, right? It's their information, it's their money, it's their property. They're hiring somebody to do a service for them, but I think a mistake, and I say this as somebody who's written a bunch of books for buyers and sellers, and is married, full disclosure, to a real estate attorney. But I think it's a big mistake for brokers to think that that's their listing, and I'm sure we've all heard that terminology throughout the years, and they blame a lot of stuff back and forth, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of in Curt's camp where I think it's all about the consumer, but I'll let the other people say something.
Well, so we, at Zillow, we take data from a lot of different sources. Obviously, the majority is from MLSs. We also take for sale by owners, which we get a lot of grief for. In the industry on our site, we take new construction data. We have the largest number of rentals and the largest rental audience as well on our site. So we take data from multiple places for it. When I look at residential versus rental, the MLS structure has done a fantastic job to make North American real estate work well. And so I am a huge supporter of the MLS structure, because on the rental side, there isn't that. And so the amount of work and cost that it takes to gather the largest rental inventory, which we have, the MLS does a lot of that work for it. It does a lot of the fraud protection, which we have to do heavily on the rental side. It has whole teams that actually clean the data and make sure that it's accurate for that. So the residential real estate works very well with this open marketplace, and we're a huge advocate of the open marketplace. And anything that any actions that are taken to start to close that, we're against.
So your point about it is the NAR monopoly, that component of what you asked about, Jeff. That's where the open MLS conversation I mentioned earlier comes in, is why do I have to belong to this organization in order to get access to sell property? So that's why I believe we're gonna see more of those kind of open MLS lawsuits. And let's remember, for those that have been in the business for a long time, these started back in the 70s. So California's already open, Alabama, Georgia, Florida's already open, and these are all based on lawsuits from 40, 50 years ago. So I envision at some point every state in the country is going to be open for that point, that I shouldn't have to do this in order to be able to do business. The next component of it that I worry about is lockboxes. For the same reason, there's lots of perceived anti-competitive behavior that can happen there too. So there's not reciprocity across the state. I must belong to this in order to get access to that. I have to pay extra if I'm, there's all kinds of rules that are that slow you down if and where's the final mile? The final mile is showing the property, right? If you're slowing me down from doing that, that also could be a problem. So that's where I think some of those conversations come from is, it's not that it's a monopoly, it's the rules that make you do this in order to get that could be perceived as a monopoly.
And Sam, you get the last word.
Okay, I mean, there've always been a few narrow cases, why a property might not belong in the MLS. There could be a celebrity situation, a very high-profile sports figure. There could be some, captain of the industry who doesn't want people to know he's selling the house and sneaking out of town. Very large, Jed Clampett type, properties that, that don't make it onto the MLS. And we've always had mechanisms, going back to the days of when the MLS, before Curt liberated us, from the mainframe, the old, mainframe systems, had office exclusives in them. And so I think that really what's different now is just the fact, and it's really something that, came about when the market was so very tight. And there was so little inventory, was that, brokers were trying to, squeeze every, last drop of juice they could get out of their listing inventory, and just the impulse to try to, work it within your network or within your firm. And, but at the same time, those really aren't the market conditions that are prevailing in most markets today. And I think, Adam Smith, invisible hand, really doesn't like pocket listings, that the invisible hand of the marketplace really wants that information to be public. And so really, I think just trying to nurture those market impulses is really what our MLS is up to.
Please thank the panel, they're amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.